In the bustling city of Atlanta, Georgia, the sun cast a warm glow over the streets, promising another vibrant day. Camille Brown, a 40-year-old black woman known for her fierce advocacy as a human rights lawyer, stepped out of a local cafe. She wore a sharp, tailored suit, her confident stride reflecting years of hard work and dedication to her cause. The morning was bright, and Camille, savoring the calm start to her day, headed toward her parked car, her mind already shifting to her busy schedule ahead. As Camille approached her vehicle, her serene morning took an unexpected turn. Two police officers, Officer Bradley and Officer Nichols, emerged from their patrol car and approached her with a sense of urgency. Camille's composure remained intact as she greeted them with a polite nod. However, the officer's demeanor was anything but courteous. "Excuse me, ma'am," Officer Bradley began, his tone carrying a hint of suspicion. "Can I see your ID, please?" Camille raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "We've received reports about a suspect fitting your description involved in some local criminal activity," Officer Nichols interjected, his expression unreadable. "You fit the description, so we need to check your ID." Camille's mind raced. She knew she had done nothing wrong. "I'm just heading to work," she replied calmly. "I don't understand why I'm being stopped. Could you explain what's going on?" The officers' faces remained impassive. "It's just a routine check," Officer Bradley said tersely, showing no sign of backing down. As Camille handed over her ID, she noticed a small crowd beginning to gather at a distance. Among them was Mrs. Mildred Lewis, a 70-year-old retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Mrs. Lewis had known Camille for years, admired her work, and now watched in growing concern as the scene unfolded. Officer Nichols scrutinized the ID but didn't seem satisfied. "We're going to have to take you in for further questioning," he declared abruptly. Camille's eyes widened. "What? On what grounds? I've done nothing wrong. This feels like harassment." Officer Bradley's expression hardened. "You're being arrested for resisting arrest. We asked you to cooperate and you're creating a scene." Before Camille could respond, the officers grabbed her arms firmly. Despite her calm demeanor, the situation escalated rapidly. Camille's voice, usually a source of justice and reason, was drowned out by the authoritative commands of the officers. She found herself being led to the patrol car, her protestations of innocence ignored. A young couple walking their dog nearby noticed the commotion and instinctively began recording the incident on their phone. They were aware that such footage could be crucial, especially when dealing with potential police misconduct. As the camera captured the unfolding events, the couple exchanged worried glances, understanding the gravity of what they were witnessing. The drive to the police station was tense. Camille sat in the back of the patrol car, her mind a swirl of frustration and disbelief. She had fought against systemic injustice for years, yet here she was, caught in a situation that mirrored the very issues she had spent her life combating. At the police station, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of routine bureaucracy and underlying tension. Camille was processed with a degree of indifference, the officers' routine actions betraying no hint of the significant mistake they had made. Unbeknownst to them, Camille's identity held considerable weight. They were unaware that they had just arrested a prominent human rights lawyer whose work had shed light on numerous cases of police misconduct. Officer Davis, a young and ambitious member of the force, was stationed nearby. His attention was drawn to the commotion, and he glanced at Camille's ID with a growing sense of recognition. A recent news article had featured Camille Brown prominently, highlighting her crucial role in tackling issues of police misconduct. The realization dawned on him that this was no ordinary suspect. Davis's heart raced as he processed the information. He quickly approached Lieutenant Olivia Parker, the new commanding officer at the station. Lieutenant Parker, in her early 40s, was known for her sharp mind and commitment to justice. She had recently taken over her role with a strong resolve to address the department's issues. "Lieutenant Parker," Davis began, his voice filled with urgency, "I think there's been a serious mistake. The woman they've just arrested, Camille Brown, is a renowned human rights lawyer. She's been involved in high-profile cases against police misconduct. Lieutenant Parker's eyes widened in surprise. Camille Brown? Are you sure? Yes, I'm certain, Davis confirmed. We need to look into this immediately. If she's involved in a federal investigation, this could be a major problem for us. Lieutenant Parker's expression grew serious. Get me the details on her arrest. We need to resolve this before it escalates further. As the wheels of the police department began to turn, Camille remained in a holding area, her frustration mounting. She knew that her wrongful arrest could unravel into something much larger, but the full implications were yet to be revealed. The situation outside continued to brew, with Mrs. Lewis and the young couple's footage setting the stage for a brewing storm of public scrutiny and outrage. The atmosphere at the police station was tense, the air thick with the anticipation of what was to come. Inside the holding area, Camille Brown remained composed, though the weight of her wrongful arrest was heavy on her shoulders. As she waited, the situation outside continued to escalate, fueled by growing public concern and anger. Lieutenant Olivia Parker was already hard at work, reviewing the details of Camille's arrest. Officer Davis had quickly briefed her on Camille's identity and the potential implications for the department. Parker's face was set in a grim line as she absorbed the information. She understood that this was no ordinary case. It was a potential catalyst for widespread scrutiny and public outrage. In the dimly lit interrogation room, Officers Bradley and Nichols were discussing the day's events, their initial confidence beginning to wane. They were unaware of the storm brewing outside and the high-profile nature of the woman they had just arrested. Officer Bradley's tone was defensive. "I don't see what the big deal is," he said. "We were just doing our job." Nichols, however, looked more worried. "Something doesn't feel right about this. If she's as important as Davis says she is, we might be in real trouble." Bradley shrugged. "We followed protocol. If she's a lawyer, she'll probably just get out of this with a slap on the wrist." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Lieutenant Parker. She walked in with a sense of authority, her presence commanding immediate respect. "Bradley Nichols," she said, her voice firm. "I need a full report on the arrest of Camille Brown, and I need it now." The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they began to recount the events of the morning. Lieutenant Parker listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern as she realized the officers had acted on little more than a hunch. The lack of solid evidence and the aggressive escalation of the situation were both troubling. Outside, the crowd had grown. Mrs. Mildred Lewis, who had witnessed the arrest, had been vocal in her opposition to the treatment Camille received. Her shouts and pleas for justice had attracted the attention of more residents, and soon a small but vocal group had gathered outside the police station, demanding answers. Among the crowd, the young couple who had recorded the arrest were showing their footage to anyone who would watch. Their recording captured the moment Camille was led away, her calm protests muffled by the officers' dismissive attitudes. The footage, now circulating on social media, was rapidly gaining traction, and the community's anger was palpable. Inside the station, Lieutenant Parker was rapidly making decisions. "We need to release Camille Brown immediately," she instructed Officer Davis. "This arrest could cause a serious public relations disaster if not handled properly. Ensure she's freed, and let's begin preparing a response to manage the media fallout." Davis nodded and quickly moved to arrange Camille's release. Meanwhile, Parker began drafting a statement for the media, aiming to control the narrative and address the growing concerns. She knew that transparency and swift action were essential to quell the mounting outrage. Back in the holding area, Camille watched as the door opened, and Officer Davis entered with a determined look. "Ms. Brown," he said, "I'm here to inform you that you're being released. There was a mistake regarding your arrest, and we're addressing the situation." Camille's eyes narrowed. "I appreciate the release, but I want to know why this happened and what steps will be taken to address the officer's conduct." Davis hesitated but then replied, "I understand your frustration. We're working on that. For now, we're going to ensure your release and handle the situation as best as we can." As Camille walked out of the station, the crowd erupted into cheers. Her release was a small victory, but it was clear that the community's fight was far from over. Camille took a deep breath, her resolve steeled by the events of the day. She knew that the true challenge lay ahead in demanding accountability and pushing for systemic change. Lieutenant Parker, watching from a distance, knew that the situation was far from resolved. The immediate crisis had been managed, but the deeper issues remained. The incident had shown a spotlight on the systemic racism and abuse of power within the department, and it was clear that reform was urgently needed. As Camille left the station, she was met by Mrs. Lewis and the young couple who had recorded the arrest. They offered their support, and Camille thanked them, her gratitude evident despite the lingering frustration. The young couple promised to continue sharing the footage, and Mrs. Lewis vowed to keep advocating for justice. The day's events had set in motion a chain reaction that was far from over. Camille's wrongful arrest had not only sparked outrage but had also highlighted the urgent need for accountability within law enforcement. As the story continued to unfold, Camille knew that her fight for justice was just beginning. The path ahead would be challenging, but she was determined to see it through, ensuring that the systemic issues revealed by this incident would not be ignored. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the bustling city. The protests outside the police station had only intensified, with more people joining the movement demanding justice for Camille Brown. Social media was abuzz with posts about the wrongful arrest, and news outlets were broadcasting live updates, capturing the growing unrest. Inside the police station, Lieutenant Olivia Parker was hard at work, trying to navigate the crisis with careful precision. The media storm was relentless, and the pressure to address the community's concerns was mounting. She had called an emergency meeting with her team, including Officers Bradley and Nichols, to discuss the fallout from Camille's arrest. Parker's office was filled with a tense silence as the officers took their seats. Her eyes were stern as she began the meeting. "We've got a serious situation on our hands. The arrest of Camille Brown has ignited widespread outrage and scrutiny. We need to address this immediately." Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "We followed the procedures we were trained on. I don't understand why this is such a big deal." Parker's gaze hardened. "It's a big deal because Camille Brown is a prominent human rights lawyer. This incident not only highlights potential misconduct but also threatens to derail an important federal investigation into systemic racism within law enforcement. You acted on a hunch without proper evidence, and now the department is under intense scrutiny." Nichols looked troubled. "We didn't know she was such a big deal. We just thought she was another suspect." Parker sighed. "That's the problem. You acted without considering the broader implications. This could have serious consequences for the entire department. We need to manage the fallout and ensure that we address the community's concerns transparently." Meanwhile, outside the station, the crowd was growing restless. The protests had turned into a full-blown demonstration, with speakers addressing the crowd about the need for justice and systemic reform. The energy was palpable, and the community's frustration was clear. Mrs. Mildred Lewis continued to be a vocal presence, her calls for accountability ringing through the air. Camille, after her release, had been busy preparing for the next steps. She met with her legal team to strategize on how to address the wrongful arrest and the broader issues of police misconduct. The incident had only strengthened her resolve to push for systemic change. As Camille reviewed the footage captured by the young couple, she knew that it would be crucial in her fight for justice. The footage showed the officer's aggression and her calm demeanor, providing a clear picture of the wrongful treatment she had endured. She planned to use it in her efforts to hold the police accountable and advocate for reforms. Lieutenant Parker, recognizing the need for action, called for a press conference to address the situation publicly. The conference was scheduled for the following day, and Parker hoped it would help defuse some of the tension and demonstrate the department's commitment to addressing the issue. That evening, Parker sat in her office, drafting her statement and preparing for the press conference. She knew that it was essential to convey sincerity and a commitment to change. Her goal was to calm the public's anger while acknowledging the need for accountability and reform. As the night wore on, the protests outside showed no signs of slowing down. The crowd remained energized, their chants echoing through the streets. Camille joined the demonstration, standing alongside community members and activists who were rallying for justice. Her presence was a symbol of resistance and a reminder of the personal toll that systemic racism and abuse of power could take. The atmosphere was charged with determination and resolve. Camille knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but the support of the community and the momentum of the protests gave her hope. The fight for justice was far from over, and Camille was prepared to lead the charge. The next morning, as the press conference approached, Lieutenant Parker faced a daunting task. She needed to address the concerns of the community, acknowledge the mistakes made, and outline the steps that would be taken to prevent such incidents in the future. The stage was set for a crucial moment. The world was watching, and the outcome of this press conference would play a significant role in shaping the future of the police department and its relationship with the community. As Parker prepared to speak, she knew that the weight of the situation rested heavily on her shoulders. The scene was set for a dramatic turn in the story. The tension was palpable, and the community's demands for justice were clear. The next steps would be critical in determining the direction of the ongoing struggle for accountability and reform. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the Atlanta police station, where anticipation hung in the air. The press conference was about to begin, and media crews were setting up their equipment, eager to hear what Lieutenant Olivia Parker had to say. Outside, the protests had reached their peak, with thousands of people demanding justice and systemic reform. The crowd buzzed with energy, united in their call for accountability. Lieutenant Parker stepped up to the podium, her face a mixture of determination and apprehension. She adjusted the microphone and glanced at the sea of reporters and protesters. The eyes of the nation were on her. Taking a deep breath, she began her statement. Thank you all for being here today. I want to address the recent arrest of Camille Brown, a prominent human rights lawyer, and the concerns that have arisen from this incident. It is clear that the actions of Officers Bradley and Nichols were not in line with the standards we expect from our department. Parker continued, her voice steady as she addressed the gravity of the situation. The arrest of Ms. Brown was based on insufficient evidence and an unfounded suspicion. This was a mistake that should never have happened. We understand the seriousness of this error, and we are committed to addressing it transparently. The press conference room was silent except for the clicks of cameras capturing every word. Camille Brown, standing in the crowd, watched with a mix of hope and skepticism. She knew that while Parker's words were a step in the right direction, real change required more than just promises. We are taking immediate steps to review and revise our policies, Parker announced. There will be an independent investigation into the conduct of Officers Bradley and Nichols. Additionally, we will be implementing mandatory training for all officers on racial profiling and proper procedures for arrest. We want to ensure that this department serves the community with fairness and integrity. The crowd outside erupted into cheers as Parker's words echoed through the speakers. Camille felt a wave of cautious optimism. The public apology and commitment to reform were significant, but she remained vigilant. The fight for justice was far from over, and she was determined to see it through. Following the press conference, Camille and her legal team met with Lieutenant Parker to discuss the next steps. The discussion was candid and focused on ensuring that the promised reforms were implemented effectively. I appreciate the commitment to change, Camille said, her tone firm but respectful. However, it's crucial that these reforms are more than just symbolic. We need a concrete plan with clear benchmarks and accountability to ensure that the department's practices truly change. Parker nodded in agreement. We understand the need for real action. We're committed to working with you and the community to ensure that these changes are meaningful. Your feedback will be invaluable as we move forward. The following weeks saw a flurry of activity as the police department began implementing the promised reforms. The independent investigation into the arrest was thorough, and Officers Bradley and Nichols faced disciplinary actions. The department's new training programs were rolled out, and community engagement efforts increased. Protests continued, but they gradually shifted from demanding immediate justice to advocating for long-term reform. The community's voice had been heard, and there was a growing sense of hope that change was on the horizon. Camille remained a central figure in the movement, using her platform to push for continued progress. She spoke at community meetings, collaborated with local leaders, and worked tirelessly to ensure that the momentum for change was maintained. One evening, as Camille looked out over the city from her office, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The road had been long and challenging, but the collective effort of the community and the commitment to reform had made a difference. The story of Camille Brown and the wrongful arrest had become a powerful symbol of the fight against systemic racism and abuse of power. It highlighted the importance of standing up against injustice and the potential for meaningful change when individuals and communities came together. As Camille prepared for another day of advocacy and activism, she was reminded of the strength and resilience of the people who had stood by her side. The path to justice was still unfolding, but the progress made was a testament to the power of perseverance and the unyielding demand for accountability. The fight for justice continued, but Camille knew that with each step forward, they were creating a future where fairness and integrity could become the norm, not just a hope. The story was far from over, and Camille was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the journey toward true equality and justice was a cause worth pursuing.